So at this time, I would like to read the bio of Tracy Gray. Could we have a spotlight on Tracy, please? Okay. So Tracy Gray is the founder and managing partner of the 22 Fund, which is an impact, growth, equity, and advisory firm with a mission of creating the quality jobs of the future by increasing the global competitiveness of manufacturing companies, intentionally targeting women and minority-owned businesses. Welcome, Tracy. She is a board of director member of AppLife Digital Solutions, Inc., a publicly traded, fully reporting startup incubator and venture studio, and of the California State University Dominguez Hills Philanthropic Foundation Endowment, where she serves as treasurer secretary on the investment committee. Tracy is also an executive in residence at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator and chairs the institution's Diversity in Entrepreneurship Advisory Council. Ms. Gray is the first Social Impact Fellow at the UC Berkeley Haas Business School Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership. In 2015, Ms. Gray gave a TEDx talk entitled, "Why It's Time for Women to Be Sexist with Investment Capital." Due to the response from Ms. Gray's TEDx talk, she founded the nonprofit We Are Enough. We Are Enough's only mission is to educate all women on how and why to invest in women-owned, for-profit businesses with a gender lens. WAE recently released the study creating the feasibility studies that we will hear much about now. So Tracy Gray, welcome to the conference. And I would like to start by engaging you with a question which I will ask Dr. Davis to follow up on by starting, if you could give us a very broad look at your work and how you see this work moving the dial in terms of race, class, and justice strategies.
Well, thank you for having me, and Ms. Davis, it's really great to meet you here. I would like to add that I have a small connection with you. One of my partners was on a ship to France in 1961 with you when she was 6 years old. There were 12 of you, and you spent 12 weeks together, Monica Doty, and she said she would not forgive me if I did not say this to you. So got that out of the way. And she says hello. So, you know, my work is around the financial system, because I'm a former engineer. I worked on the space shuttle program, so I'm highly logical. And when I got into the financial system about 20 years ago through venture capital, I saw the inequities, and it didn't make any sense. The inequities I saw, and they continue today, and the numbers have not changed, 98.7% of the finances around the world, the assets around the world, are controlled by white men. 98.7%. In the US, that's $7 trillion. Even though all the research has shown that women and people of color yield higher returns. So if this was purely capitalism and purely about returns, you would have more women and people of color in the system. But then that tells you that this is about systemic racism and structural barriers to the financial system, which shows up in the venture capital world where I am. My goal is increasing ownership and growing generational wealth for people of color, especially brown and Black people. because ownership has been the way that people have been able to grow wealth, but we weren't allowed in the 50s to own housing, which is how a lot of white people were able to grow their wealth and pass it on to their children. And now the same thing is happening in entrepreneurship and business ownership. And so what I'm trying to do is not to fix a broken system the same as people think about in the police system, but to break the system and start anew, where people remember that finance is not about money, it's about power. And the ownership of capital needs to see any change, it needs to be in the hands of brown and black people. There is zero incentives for white men who control the system and have the power right now to change this. They're making money hand over foot. We know that. They're not investing in women and people of color. If you look at the numbers of women and people of color entrepreneurs that receive this investment capital, for brown women, it's under 0.1%. For black women, it's 0.006% of the capital goes to us, a rounding error. So the only way we change that is we bring more women and people of color being the owners of capital, who then invest in firms like mine, so that we can then invest in women of color and people of color. And the research has shown this too. When we have capital, we invest in women and people of color. When women and people of color entrepreneurs have capital, they hire women and people of color. And that, to me, in the system I work in, that's how we're going to have change and grow wealth and change what is happening right now when women and people of color are the ones who are being hurt the most from COVID. 40% to 50% of brown and black businesses are not coming back after COVID. So the only way we do this, and it's not building back better, frankly, because what are we building back better from? What was it before? We need to build it differently. We need to create new systems. And I don't like the word inclusion anymore, because that means I have to come to your table and be included with you. That's not, I want people to come to our table because it's got better dishes and better wine, like I like to say. So this is what I'm trying to do, is to create I have a group of women, including Gwendolyn, that we're looking at the system and trying to move the financial system and the power into women and people of color. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And I'm really excited when you said not the inclusion, because that was going to be my follow-up to ask Dr. Davis what she is thinking, because recently I have been reading quite a few scholarly articles about financial inclusion for Blacks and specifically Black women. So as you talked about radical change, Dr. Davis, are we really, as Tracy's saying, moving beyond inclusion as we know it to move into these areas of what you spoke about so well before, of radical change? And how do you see that manifesting itself, showing up in the world rather, for Black people in terms of economic strength?
Well, yeah, I think Tracy and I are in agreement on this issue of inclusion. Inclusion is not bad per se, but if we don't consider the terms of inclusion, if we don't consider the framework within which the inclusion is enacted, then we're failing to recognize that that inclusion can simply bring previously excluded or marginalized people into a framework that is designed to function in exactly the same way that it did when they were excluded. So it's almost as if you're asking Black and brown people to participate in the machinery of racism. So this is why we have to begin to think about how we create new structures. This is why the work that should be going on at this very moment is the work of looking closely at the ways in which institutions are organized, and to recognize that in many instances, we are addressing issues that should have been addressed in the aftermath of slavery. And I know that you're close to Great Barrington, which is the birthplace of the great W.E.B. Du Bois. Am I right?
Yes.
And I like the fact that Du Bois always insisted on a different notion of democracy. Not the sort of democracy based on racial capitalism that would continue to enact many of the same problems as during slavery, but rather how to transform that system. And we have not done that. And this is why we're dealing with issues that should have been dealt with in the aftermath of slavery. But yeah, new foundations, new structures, new institutions, a revolution, basically. That's what we're talking about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis and Tracy, to speak about this in terms of excavation of a revolution instead of simply inclusion. Very powerful. And I'm sure that after our break, there will be persons that want to revisit this particular topic.